Um. So good. Good morning. Good after. Piss off. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Rara Rabbit and to my first video of 2021. I'd hoped to have had this out weeks ago. I'm aware it's already sort of the back end of January, but I just haven't really felt like being on camera or interacting with people at all. And you know, I do go through periods where I really do struggle to be visible, I suppose. I get quite nervous a lot of the time when I put stuff out because I don't know, that's just how I am. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about last year because it was pretty different. Now, at the end of every year, I usually make a video sort of reflecting on the year, and I usually say how weird a year it has been, because typically things are very weird for me. And last year was no exception. It was simultaneously the longest and shortest year that I've ever experienced. And I feel like I've learned a lot about myself and how I work in that space of time. Now, we went into a proper lockdown at the back end of March, I think it was, here in the UK. And it was quite a strict lockdown. You know, we had to stay home. We could only go out once a day for exercise and to do essential shopping. You know, it was quite heavily enforced, and I feel like people listened to that and actually followed it. And for me, it was kind of odd because I don't really react very well to change. But weirdly, this didn't bother me too much. And I think it was because it was a change that was happening for all of us, that even though it was quite a scary time and it was quite confusing and people didn't really know, you know, the full extent of COVID and what the symptoms were, and, you know, it was all very new, it was all very strange. But I didn't really feel too much anxiety over that, and I didn't feel too much distress, and I think maybe it's because there was also this sense of unity, that this was something everyone was going through and we were all in it together. And I don't know, with that came a sort of sense of peace for me, which I was okay with, even though everything around me was changing and felt strange. I knew that was the case for everybody, so I kind of felt connected to people, which for me is very odd because I rarely feel connected to people. I rarely feel like I can relate to other people because of my experiences and how my brain works, and, you know, I feel very alienated a lot of the time. But weirdly, this felt quite comforting. And also, as well, as somebody who is quite reclusive, who, you know, I'm in my room in the majority of the time. You know, I don't have a great deal of social interaction outside. It felt quite strange that suddenly all of these things that used to be viewed so negatively were now being praised, like staying at home and watching TV and not interacting, you know, not going outside, interacting with people was now being praised. That was the thing to do. That was keeping people safe. That was keeping people alive. And I felt sort of quite good about myself for the first time in a long time, because now all of a sudden that was like the admirable thing. You were helping people, and that was good. So for the first couple of months of lockdown, as sort of weird and you know, difficult it was to kind of figure out and adjust to, at the same time it was like the recluses were winning. We were winning, you know, we people were suddenly almost looking up to us, you know, to figure out how to get through periods of isolation. And as well, what I found sort of really odd was I was seeing lots of people getting very, very depressed. I was hearing more stories of people, you know, committing suicide because of the loneliness, and it genuinely like surprised me, because I've dealt with loneliness for years that's kind of my default, you know. I mean, I don't want to sound all miserable, but it is me, so I'm gonna. But, you know, sort of being depressed and not really being too optimistic about life, and just, you know, being mentally ill. That is my default. And even though I knew that wasn't other people's default, seeing people get so sort of distressed and depressed and, you know, to the point of suicide, for me was like, well, I've been dealing with this for years. Like, I'm not saying that I'm happy that people were depressed or you know, going to the extremes of killing themselves. Obviously, I'm not happy about that, but there was a weird smugness about, like, again, it when you're so used to kind of being at the bottom of the ladder and feeling like you're kind of a shit person for not functioning at the level of other people, or a level you think you should be. I don't know, suddenly it all became, it felt more like a superpower during lockdown, because I could get through it. It was this is what my life is like, you know. I feel for the most part that I live in my own sort of version of the lockdown all of the time. So yeah, obviously, you know, I wasn't, you know, glad to hear that people were so upset and struggling, but it was one of those things where it surprised me, it shocked me. Like, it was like, oh wow, like I felt like I was in the more powerful position. Like, everything had been flipped. Like, now my low level of functioning and my sort of ability to just kind of deal with being miserable all the time was now like my superpower for getting through the lockdown. Now, obviously, it did at times affect my mental health in a bad way. I mean, we're coming up to almost a year since that initial lockdown, and I kind of feel now that, I mean, things started to open up a bit sort of around summer. Here in the UK, we had the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, which all through August, like, because pubs had started opening up and restaurants, and it was like you get 50% off your meal if you went out to eat in August, you know, to try and like help businesses. But ultimately, COVID levels ended up kind of going up because people are now going out and eating, and it was just a complete shit show. It's still a complete shit show, but that's sort of when things started to kind of open up and everything started to kind of unravel, and I think people started to really lose faith in the government's ability to handle this. I mean, I don't think people had faith in that anyway, but now it was really showing that we haven't got a clue what we're doing. And suddenly that feeling of unity, of us all being in this together, of us all trying, you know, going through something really difficult and being able to relate to each other, that kind of went. Everything started to feel more hostile and aggressive, people getting really fed up with sort of constant changes in rules, with people breaking rules, with, I mean, to be honest, I'm not even entirely sure what the rules are at the moment, because things kind of constantly change and it's never that clear. And I kind of felt sort of towards the back end of summer, kind of throughout autumn and winter, that, you know, people were now sort of fed up, and I now feel that sense of unity is completely gone, and people are more disconnected from each other and more sort of angry towards each other, because, you know, we're all very frustrated. Many people haven't been able to see family or, you know, just have their regular life, and, you know, we're all pretty fed up. So yeah, that I started to really kind of feel more depressed towards the back end of last year, and I'm aware that usually, like I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video, that winter tends to be kind of harder for me. I tend to be even more isolated and feel even more like I just want to hide away. I blame that on it being colder and darker, but I don't know. So another thing as well, I guess, to mention about being in lockdown is, you know, being in lockdown whilst having DID or OSDD, or, you know, experiences of that nature. I guess one of the positives for me is that even though I couldn't go out and do things with real people, which is something I rarely did anyway, I had all the people in my head to keep me company. And there were times when, you know, I would be hanging out with my voices on my altars and, you know, feeling really good, just having a conversation. And it kind of dawned on me that the majority of people don't have this experience. If they're on their own, they are on their own. Whereas for me, you know, there's always usually somebody lurking around to talk to. So I almost felt, again, this thing of like, now my mental illness was almost a superpower, in that I had these tools that other people don't have in order to get through these periods of isolation. Now, at the same time, that was also a negative, because if the conversations I'm having aren't particularly pleasant, or if Darren is around, who, you know, he gets very paranoid and very agitated and very angry, you know, there's a lot of stuff that's very unpleasant and not fun to deal with, and definitely being in isolation can make that worse and can make that feel worse. So, you know, that's quite a mixed experience. As I said, on the one hand, sort of felt quite lucky, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but I felt kind of lucky that I do hear voices, that I do have other people in my head, that I have these other bits of personality, because it meant that I could get through some pretty lonely periods and not feel so lonely. But then, you know, when things are bad, things are bad. So before I wrap things up, I guess I will talk a little bit more about DID in particular. Now, for those who have been following for a while, I have a working diagnosis of DID, dissociative identity disorder. I've had it for, almost 10 years now. And it's one of those things that I've struggled to get help with, because, as many people know, it is still seen as quite a controversial disorder, and just where I am in the UK, in England, there's nothing around for that. And I've been trying really hard to try and find, you know, the right sort of support for that, like a community mental health team won't have anything to do with me. Dissociation in general, and not just DID, I think is still, a lot of people don't really know much about it. A lot of mental health teams and stuff are still aren't really trained on that. But thankfully, me and my GP have managed to secure funding for me to go to the Pottergate Centre, which deals with trauma and dissociation. I emailed them sometime last year, just kind of telling them what my experiences were, and you know, sort of what help and support I'd got over the years, the various diagnoses that I'd gone through, you know, stuff like that. They'd sent me the screening tools. I scored very high on them. I think on one of them, if you score higher than 30, there's a chance of you having DID. I got 50 something. And you know, it's a private clinic, and I just personally don't have the funds to do that myself. But yeah, me and my GP wrote to whoever it is that helps with funding. Yeah, and they came through, and I'm now able to be seen by the Pottergate Centre. Haven't got a letter yet, but again, COVID, things are just very, very slow, but at least I've got that, and this means that I might be able to get my working diagnosis turned into an official diagnosis. I might be able to get the treatment that is correct for me, and that's kind of exciting. I mean, you know, as exciting as it can be to, you know, go through trauma treatment, but I'm just happy to have that, and to know that, you know, to not feel like I'm at a dead end with things, basically. So yeah, you know, I have lots of different people in my head, and I feel like with lockdown, allowed us more time to kind of work together and work on communication and figure some things out. I guess because I don't have the things I would use to distract myself outside of the house. Certain activities I can't do because of lockdown. You know, and I've kind of been forced to sit with myself a lot more. I mean, like I said, I always spend all my time in this room pretty much all the time anyway. You know, I do stuff on my PC, I do all my illustrations and everything here. But now I felt like this was a period of time where there's nothing else I can really do but sit with myself and figure things out. And I guess we've just been trying to figure out what we can do once lockdown is over and life returns to normal. Do I feel positive? No. But I feel more positive than I usually would do, which has got to count for something. But yes, I guess that was kind of just what I wanted to talk about in this video. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I would like to put out a massive apology to my Patreon supporters, because I know I haven't kept up with stuff, and I mean, I know that some of you who support me just want to support me and don't really care about the rewards, but at the same time I made that pledge and I should be doing that, and so I just want to say that I'm sorry, and that I'm still kind of figuring out what I want to do with Patreon, if it's worth me sticking with, or if maybe when I've got a better format and I kind of know what it is that I want to focus on, that maybe I should stop Patreon for now and start it up when I've got a more solid idea of things. I don't know, but I'd like to thank you all anyway. So yes, yeah, is that everything we've covered, Rara? I think it is. There's probably a lot more, but I'm going to be honest, I just want to stop filming. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I have been Max, aka the Rara Rabbit. We'll see you in the next video.